Welcome to the last episode of A History of the Middle Belt of Nigeria from earlier written records. In episode 2, we discussed the rise of the Middle Belt political movements, the splitting and merging of factions, and the Middle Belt ideology. In today's episode, we shall be looking at the Wilink's Commission, Middle Belt in Nigeria's independence struggle, post-independence and contemporary issues. During the London Lancaster House Constitutional Conference in 1954 and 1957, in preparation to the granting of independence, the northern and southern minority ethnic groups expressed their fears of domination by the larger groups Igbo, Yoruba, Hausa, Kanuri, and Fulani in an independent Nigeria. The Middle Belt communities cited discrimination and maltreatment of its people, such as non-representation in various legislative houses, use of force, including physical beatings, to make ethnic minorities support the MPC in the north, subjecting non-Muslims in the north to Muslim laws and systematic discriminations against persons from ethnic minorities, especially in the civil service of the native authority. Also, the UMBC was opposed to the Hausa and Fulani alkali, judging the ethnic minorities from an Islamic viewpoint. Therefore, the southern minorities, together with the Middle Belt, demanded for the creation of states to replace the existing three northern, western, and eastern regions, which were created by the Richards Constitution of 1948. In response, the British government set up a commission of inquiry headed by Sir Henry Wilink to investigate the veracity of these claims.
Earlier on I did say that the UMBC is actually an amalgam of two political parties, and they had slightly different ideologies. One was more for the protection of Christians and tribal minorities. The other one was more political. They came together, and that political branch is the one that pushed for the creation of this Middle Belt region out of northern Nigeria. As you said rightly, those who were negotiating before independence in London made their wishes known, but they were asking for independent states to be created. And remember, we have already discussed, I told you how Kum, way back in 1907, suggested the creating a region, central region, a Benue region. Then the same thing, Murel suggested the same thing. Then Temple suggested. So the idea of independent, autonomous states or regions was actually rife. But when they didn't get it, 1956, Alhaji Ibrahim Imam, a Kanuri man, how come he was representing Boko Federal Constituency? Yes. Ibrahim Imam was a member of the Borno Youth Movement. And as I said, tribal groups, associations, is where all the parties started. That BYM, Borno Youth Movement, was aligned to NPC, Northern People's Congress. The Fulanis, they agreed to use that party that was formed by the Fulanis. So he was rather radical and fell out with them. They didn't like him. They threw him out. He wanted to run to go to the National Assembly, House of Assembly, but they didn't accept him. And he was sympathetic to the cause of the Middle Belt people. And they met with the leaders of UMBC, Taka and Co. And Taka said, come, let's work together. We'll give you a platform. Sure? Taka said, yes, sure. So Taka convinced a constituency in Benue State around Boko. It has a native name, which I don't remember now, but around Boko. He told the constituents there that they should vote for this man. And it's a plan that we have. So the people voted for him. So he went to the Northern House of Assembly representing Boko Federal Constituency. Now, the UMBC had already factionalized at this stage. 1956, two factions had emerged out of it. As I said, one led by Pastor David Lott and the other one by the Moses Nyamrang. And they were holding separate meetings, separate conventions, while one would be meeting in Kagoro, in Sariki Gwamna Awan's palace. The other one will be meeting in Ilorin or Kaba. Alhaji Ibrahim Imam moved a motion. The motion was that this house should create a Middle Belt region out of the Northern region. And he said it will comprise of, and he listed provinces. He listed 8 provinces. And those 8 provinces are exactly the areas today we call Middle Belt. It was, the provinces he listed covered Niger State, present Kwara State, Kogi State, Plateau State, Southern Kaduna, Taraba, and Adamawa. But they were provinces at the time. He moved his motion on the floor. And you know, anytime you move a motion is moved, there has to be a seconder. And there was a seconder. That seconder was from Plateau, from Jos, Moses Nyamrang. He seconded the motion. Fine. So the motion was seconded, and therefore it's going to be discussed on the floor of the House. It was discussed. Every parliamentarian had a chance to speak, say his mind regarding the motion. So one by one they spoke. And we are fortunate we have a record of what they said and how the voting went on that day. 6th of May, 1956. The mover of the motion defended his motion, and everybody spoke. When it was time to vote, 68 voted against the motion, including Middle Belt parliamentarians. The only person who supported the motion, the mover of the motion and his seconder, just 2. So the motion had only 2 votes in favor, 68 against. Among the 60, apart from the 68, there were 6 people who abstained. They decided not to vote either way. They abstained from voting. You see, the motion was a popular one, but the leader of the party then, Pastor David Lott, had the final say. He spoke. They said, let the leader of the party say what he has to say, then the voting will be done. In his speech, he said, much as our people would want to have our own region, we are not ready yet. Whenever we are ready, we will bring that motion to this House to be debated. And some of us just feel sad. It was a missed opportunity, an opportunity thrown away. But a little digging into what happened revealed that Alhaji Ibrahim Imam and his supporter had not done their homework enough. We hear the word lobby in Parliament. They had not lobbied enough. They had not convinced their party members enough and other parliamentarians. They had not really gotten enough support. We actually discovered that Alhaji Ibrahim Imam was later advised by his friends, this your motion will not go through. Step it down for now. Step it down. Wait for a more opportune time. He actually went to step the motion down. But when the opposition discovered what he wanted to do, they told the clerk of the house, they said, don't agree. Tell him it's too late. It has already been what they call gazetted, or what do they call it, Hamzat. There's a paper, the paper for the next day's plenary, what will be discussed. It had already been entered and scheduled. So they told him it was too late. He will have to table his motion, like it or not. And he said, it's okay. They were actually not quite prepared. Yeah, and that was it. They lost that, and the opportunity never came again till independence.
And will it be fair to say the opportunity still hasn't ever presented itself again, even now? Since the system of governance has changed, and
yeah.
the way we legislated in those days is different from now.
Yeah. Independence was granted us in 1960. It was the British who wrote our independence constitution after the negotiations in Lancaster House. We got independence in 1960, but we were not yet a republic. It was in 1963 that our people, the ethnic nationalities making up Nigeria, came together and negotiated a new constitution. That new constitution was debated and approved by the ethnic nationalities of Nigeria on the 25th and 26th of July, 1963. What they approved was sent to the parliament, then in Tafawa Balewa Square in Lagos. They debated it, first reading, second reading, third reading, and approved a new constitution for Nigeria to take effect from 1st October 1963. That constitution came into use on 1st October 1963. And some of us are saying we need to go back to that constitution. It was the first and last constitution negotiated by our people. Since then, Nigerians have not negotiated the constitution. After 1963, 3 years down the road, 1966, the military struck. The first military coup took place on the 15th of January 1966. And General Ironsi then became the head of state. He passed his first decree, promulgated his first decree, Decree number 1, which was the Constitution Suspension Decree. That constitution was suspended only. Some of us are saying, bring it back. It was only suspended. We can lift that suspension today. Well, let us move a little bit on. In the same 1966, General Ironsi passed another decree, Decree number 34, which was titled the Unification Decree. He abolished the 4 regions that existed then, abolished the regional assemblies, abolished the flags, the representatives of the regions in London, anything to do with the regions. The regions will not make laws for themselves anymore. And Nigeria became one unitary state with one constitution. And the constitution had been suspended anyway. The rule was by military decree. But in July of the same year, General Ironsi was toppled. He was killed, and Gowon came to office. Now, Gowon came into office and created 12 states in 1967. He created 12 states. Where is Gowon from? General Yakubu Gowon is actually from the Middle Belt. He knew about the fears of Middle Belters, about their demands leading up to independence. So it's not surprising that when he had the chance, he created 12 states. The 12 states could have satisfied the yearnings of Middle Belters instead of the old northern region, western region, eastern region, and the midwestern region created by the 6th Constitution. Gowon replaced them with 12 states. Unfortunately, Gowon did not give them the powers that the previous regions had. The previous regions had constitutions, they had regional assemblies, they made their laws, they had representations in London, they controlled their resources, they paid a royalty to the federal government, and any derivation was then 50% if resources were being picked from your region by the federal government, So, but Gowon created 12 states, but did not give him the powers. They didn't have the political powers that the former regions had. So those regions were merely administrative units of the central government, unfortunately. So the opportunity looked as if it had come for self-governance in the states, but we never had it. Until today, the states, the 36 states, still don't have their constitutions, still don't have control of their resources. In fact, so many powers have been taken away from them. The federal government's exclusive list in the 1999 Constitution has 68 items, although last year, 2 of them were successfully moved to the concurrent list, so there are 66 items. The concurrent items were only 30 on the list. With the 2 that were moved makes it 32. The generation of electricity, now individuals and state governments can generate electricity and distribute it. I understand that railways too has been moved, so.
That is a very important question. In 1953, at the Federal House of Assembly seated in Lagos, Anthony Inahoro had moved a motion for self-government in 1956. And when he moved this motion for self-government governance in 1956, the Sardona of Sokoto had asked that the motion be different. The motion should be as soon as practicable. And in Sardona's book of My Life, published in 1961, he actually explained that the reason why he moved for as soon as practicable was because by that time, 1953, if independence had been obtained in 1956, the North would not have had enough manpower. So that is actually a confession of the reality on ground. One of the examples where we can see is that by the time the Premier of Northern Nigeria, Sardona, was the Premier of Northern Nigeria, what was his highest qualification? It was grade 3 teacher certificate. And then what was the qualification of Sir Tefa Balewa? It was also a grade 3 teacher certificate. They didn't even have an advanced certificate. But were that the only people from the north of Nigeria at that time who had qualification from, had acquired qualifications from the universities? The answer is simply no. But the kind of lopsided foundation that the North had built was that even though we were struggling for unity, we were struggling for togetherness, the lack of sincerity in the North was very glaring. For instance, at this time, in the 1950s, we already had Northerners who were not necessarily from the core North, or what we'll call from the far North, or maybe not even Muslims, who had acquired greater certificates, the likes of Barau Diko, who was a medical doctor, and then you have the likes of later on Professor Dr. Ishaya Audu at that time, who would become the first Vice Chancellor, first black Nigerian Vice Chancellor of the University of Northern Nigeria. he was studying at that time. You had the likes of Joseph Tarka, who was to become the president of the Middle Belt struggle, who was elected in Lafayette in January 1957. And even the fact that the meeting was holding in Lafayette tells you that the Middle Belt struggle was actually propelled on not making it to be just in one place. Don't just meet in Jos. Don't just meet in Makurdi. These meetings were held. I told you of a meeting that held in Kafanchan, 1955. So they were actually working to ensure that everybody was carried along. And I have also made this, the contribution was great because at this moment in time, the likes of Patrick Doherty, he was a Catholic seminarian by 1949. So if he was a seminarian, what level of seminary education he was at that time? He must have studied and finished maybe philosophy. And then he's now going to go into theology. If at that time at 1949, he was a seminarian, he had acquired a first degree by the standard of education in the world. So where was he when the North was looking for persons in 1953? Where was Reverend David Lord in 1953 in the scheme of things? So the truth is that the North was not sincere in the struggle, but the qualification, the resilience of the people of the Middle Belt, or the people who were to form what became the Middle Belt, was actually was not to be matched, because the presence of missionary schools at that time has actually made that there were lots of qualified people across the North, but maybe they were not in the North that was preferred. For instance, in Kaduna, the first girls' college in the whole of northern Nigeria was called Our Lady of Apostles in Kaduna. Now the school is called Queen Amina College. Now, and then St. Anne's, which the current emir of Kano, Sanusi II, attended. Yes, so the North had benefited, and but the Middle Beltons actually contributed. And you can say by extension that the Christian missionary activities has actually impacted the North in a very indescribable way that has been downplayed. So for instance, you have an Akiga from Akiga Sai from Benue, who already had an education before 1915. He could read and write. And then he died in 1959. If he died in 1959, Nigeria had not even gotten independence. What was the role? There was another Akiga whom I know wrote a book about the thief culture, and the book was published around 1920 something. Now, where was he at the time that the North was seeking for qualified hands? Now, but so for the Premier of Northern Nigeria, that is Samuel Bello, to admit that if Nigeria had gained independence in 1956, the floodgates of the civil service will not accommodate the Northerners. He also meant that he was economical with the truth, because there were lots of Northern Nigerians at that time who had acquired education. For instance, in the Ham area that I come from, there was Musa Haruna at that time, was a teacher already. He with Sadona went to England, yes, for a program, I think about 1950. The man wrote a book. He's the first person from our area to travel abroad. So the list will go. If you go to Adama, you're going to find people who had actually acquired education at that time. Some of our people were pastors, and before they became pastors, they had acquired a certificate. Right. So there were people who already had an education by the time Nigeria was going for independence across the north of Nigeria, and they were ready to work for the growth and the progress of the region. But maybe the region preferred some other people than others. That is just the problem with northern Nigeria. So the likes of Joseph Tarka, they were already well, they were doing well, they had already graduated, and they were very outspoken. And because they realized that the civil service in the north of Nigeria, which was actually the native authority, it had a preference for people from certain localities. In my PhD dissertation, I actually make reference to a Ham person by the name Modegani. He was so brilliant and wanted to be in the native authority, but he couldn't gain admittance. He actually converted into a Muslim so that he would be employed. That is not a hearsay. That is something that is traceable. Today, his family is one of the most strongest family in Islam in our area, and we have no problems with the progress. But we're saying, was it that their forefather, their grandfather, wanted to be a Muslim by choice, or it was the kind of preference at that time to Muslims to be in the native authority than it was? It was supposed to be Northernization. It was supposed to be Nigerianization first. Nigerianization, then Northernization. Then after Northernization, today what is happening across the universities in northern Nigeria, how many people from the Middle Belt would be employed to teach now? So that is already a problem. So yes, the Middle Belt people contributed a lot at the time of independence, and they were ready to work as teachers. They were prepared to work as teachers because they had acquired teacher certificates. So most of the schools also were being run at this time by the mission. And you know, you will not teach at the mission school if you were not qualified. For instance, Da Rampam, who became the first Bongom Jos, he was already a teacher in Riyom in the 1950s. He was a teacher riding a bicycle in Riyom. It was from Riyom that he was brought to become the Bongom Jos. So if he had not been qualified, how would we have solved the problem at that time? So the impact of the work of the people from here is actually indescribable. I came across a friend, or the father of a friend of mine in the university, who comes from current day Kogi State. The father happens to be a Basa. He was educated and was posted to go and work in Sokoto. That is the northwest region in the 1950s. He worked there, retired, and became ill, and he was here in Abuja, and there was a time there was going to be accreditation, what do you call it, verification. They needed to see him in person. His son called me. I was the one who drove his father to Sokoto, so it's not that I heard the story. He was taken from Basa, which is here in the central region of Nigeria, to Sokoto to go and work in the civil service. Why was he not allowed to work in Benue or Kogi of that time? Why did he have to go to Sokoto? It's clear sign that Sokoto didn't have the manpower. So the fact that the people of the Middle Belt contributed both in the civil service but in teaching to ensure that the North developed and will reach where we are, it's something that should be an accolade, and also it should attract togetherness. Some of the earliest lecturers from northern Nigeria who worked at the university, at Ahmadu Bello University's area, were from Benue. A good number of them, including Saro, who was a vice chancellor at a point in time. But since Saro was vice chancellor, can anybody from the Middle Belt now be vice chancellor at the Ahmadu Bello University's area? So this is actually the irony of life. Now, and we are living with it, but we're not doing much about it. But we have contributed our quota to nation building. As I said, even the Civil War, the contribution of the Middle Belt can never be overemphasized because of the number. And most of them were rank and file, not senior officers. Though we had a chunk of senior officers, but the number of rank and file, where were the people ready where were you going to recruit these young people, agile, who were going to go and fight to keep Nigeria clean, one? So their contribution has been immense, very, very immense. The church has contributed, and the people groups of the Middle Belt contributed immensely to not just the promotion of daily administration, but even the production of education. So education was qualitative at that time because you could only be employed when you have what it takes And most of the institutions that have made name in northern Nigeria, where were they found? You talk about Baptist High School, Jos. You talk about Hillcrest in Jos. You talk about the schools in General Kogi. You talk about schools here, Our Lady of Apostle Girls College in Akwanga. If you look at where the schools were located, and that school in Akwanga that I just made mention was established in 1957 to train girls. And the college I talk about in Kaduna, Our Lady Queen of Apostles College, was established before 1951. It was already there as a girls' college. The school in Koi Girls Secondary School was established in I think about 1949. It has become a school. So all these people that were trained from this, some of them became health workers. They administered drugs. Some of them became teachers. Some of them became civil servants. Some of them were in all forms of the life of this country, contributing to the progress and development of not just northern Nigeria, but Nigeria as a whole. But as to whether we've gotten credit for that is a subject of discussion for another day.
In their presentation before the Wilink Commission, the Middle Belt stated that it did not wish for the British to leave northern Nigeria undivided before the end of colonial rule. For instance, M.E. Ochonu records that one of the major misgivings of the ethnic minorities of northern Nigeria, echoed by Bitrus Rangpam, was that the ultimate aim of the Muslim North was to dominate other non-Muslim groups at all costs. They also presented how Middle Belt languages were degraded by the native authorities' education policy. The Wilink Commission report released in 1958 said the fears of the minorities were genuine, but the Commission refused to approve the creation of states or regions as requested.
Now, one of the major issues at the Wilink Commission was the fear of the people of the Middle Belt, because they felt that ethnic minorities of northern Nigeria were the ultimate, were actually, what would say, they were dominated. And in fact, as echoed by Bitrus Rangpam, quoted in Ochonu 2014, page 102, he said the ultimate aim of the Muslim North was to dominate other groups at all costs. And this is a harsh fact that should be talked about. So why were they interested in dominating? Well, maybe partly because what they are taught is that we who are non-Muslims from northern Nigeria were second-class citizens. I've just said that I do not believe that that is Islam, because that is not being preached in the western part of Nigeria. And a Yoruba man, whether they be Muslims, they be Christians, they work together. Right, it's happening among the Ibira, it's happening among the Idoma and Igala and all that. Now, so why was it different in the north of Nigeria? So it must have been the kind of ideology that they have actually came up, they have maybe coined. Now, so if their aim was to dominate the northerners at all costs, or the other northerners at all costs, it tells you that there was a sinister plan. Now, you see, one of the issues at the Wilink Commission, which were to propel the United Middle Belt Congress under the able leadership of Joseph Tarka as the president at that time, was that there were allegations of systematic discrimination against the people groups of the Middle Belt. There was, and these were people from ethnic minorities, especially in the civil service or the native authority in northern Nigeria, which I have referenced that a person from my ethnic group who wanted to be in the native authority had to Islamize in order to be employed. That is not supposed to have been. But you see, that is in the past. But the question that we should be worried about is that, has it changed now? Now, if it has not changed, then we are not being sincere, and there can be no way that there can be one North when this kind of systematic discrimination are still being propagated, or if in fact promoted. I just told you from the beginning, I wanted to study at the Bayero University, Kano. I could not gain admission because I was Philip John. Because at that year, in that year, 2000, I scored 202 in JAM. And the cutoff mark for Bayero University was 160. So what happened to my 42 that I was not taken? And Kano, Kaduna State is a catchment area of Bayero University, Kano. So why was I not taken? I have not had anybody who had explained that to me. So thanks to Abdullah Mahdi, who decided to get me into abuse area based on merit, because I didn't know him. My name just came out in the newspapers. So we are not saying that everybody in northern Nigeria is a sectionalist, but there are sectionalists, and we need to call them out so that they come and change this. Now, the United Middle Belt Congress was opposed to Hausa and Fulani Alkali. There was no way a Hausa or Fulani Alkali would be judging cases in Benue amongst the chief who barely understand Hausa. It's the same thing, let's say in Shandam. It's the same thing, let's say in Southern Kaduna. It's the same thing in Nupe-land. So this was one thing that was clear. People in Benue, let's say Idoma, let's say Igala in Kogi, let's say Basa in Kogi, and other ethnic groups, why would they have an alkali from somewhere? If it was about judgment, then you train people, let them go to a school, acquire the certificate, and then they will be competent to pass judgment that can be used. The other thing was that, well, it is not just an Islamic viewpoint, but Mrs. Mary Princewell, who was the Bureau women leader at the Wilinks Commission in 1958-50, when it was seated, she protested the denial of women's rights, which means that since northern women were not ready, some of them were not ready. Some of these women who had attended the girls, the queens, the Lady of Queen Apostles College in Kaduna, and then Ola in that is the Our Lady of Apostle Girls College in Akwanga, and other similar schools, because there are too many to be listed. They didn't have a place. So she protested this before this commission, and the Middle Belt languages that were being degraded by the Native Authority Administration. Now, you had Yaki the Jahilchi, which was war against ignorance, which was actually an educational policy of the northern government, northern Nigerian government. Why then were these pamphlets not translated into languages, since the people were competent and they could write their languages? Now, so as a promoter of language, this is one area of domination. Once somebody tries to push your language, he's invariably trying to delete your identity. And these are some of the things we're still struggling with this. In Kaduna State, during the reign of El-Rufai, he sat down in the government house and decided to change the nomenclature of the chiefdoms in southern Kaduna. The question is that, why would our chiefdoms bear names in Hausa? The chiefdom is about us, so we should be the ones to sit and decide how we want our chiefdoms to be identified. So once we want to move as a people in northern Nigeria, we must come back to the drawing board. And one of the questions I've often tried to answer is that when we talk about minority, people used to think that the minority is somebody who does not have a huge number. No, I have said this over time that when we talk about minority group, we are talking about people who live in differential and inequitable treatment. This is not about number. If you're talking about number, what is the number of the Gbagi people in Nigeria? The Gbagi people will run into millions, because there are Gbagi people in Kaduna State, Gbagi people in Niger, Gbagi people in the Abuja capital city, Gbagi people in Nasarawa, Gbagi people on the plateau. And some of them in Kogi from Kotonkafe and all that. When you put together their number, how many are they? Then why are they a minority? It's the same thing when you look at the population. Some scholars have suggested that the Tiv language may be spoken by more than 6 million people. Why is Tiv listed as a minority language? Let's even have a look. How many people speak Fulfulde in Nigeria that it is considered as a major language? So this question of somebody being viewed as a minority is not only limited to the question of number. It is about this inequitable treatment. Once you are not being catered for by the government of the day, you are a minority. How come apartheid worked in South Africa? How many white people were in South Africa at the time of apartheid? The black population was over 20 million, but they were being controlled by people, by the white minority. In that case, they were to be a white minority, but they became the white majority because they had the power and took away the lands of the black people, and the black people became laborers on the farmlands of their ancestors. So when we are talking about minority, people should be clear that it's not a question of figures. It is the question of the structure of governance. Once it does not favor you, nobody gets to talk about you. So yes, these are very, very, very salient issues. Now, the United Middle Belt had viewed this, and this was the treatment against the people in Zulu. This was the treatment against the people in Southern Borno. This was the treatment against the people in other parts, Southern Kaduna and other parts. And therefore, they came together and said, no, you can't continue to treat us like this. The only question that we also need to ask ourselves from the Middle Belt is that where we are the majority, have we also treated the other ethnic groups that are not as many as the ethnic groups that we come from? Because we don't need to just be pointing accusing finger at somebody. We should also look at inward. I have a problem because within the Middle Belt, instead of struggling so that our voices will all be heard on the same dais, some of our ethnic groups today have also become subjugators of the other minority groups amongst them. That is not fair. And once we are talking about fairness, he who goes to equity should go with clean hands. And therefore, we also need to look inward and begin to say, look, enough is enough. When we are asking for things to be done properly, we should be in the forefront of doing things properly. I am a staunch advocate that things should be on the basis, employment should be on the basis of excellence, not on quota system. Admission into university should be on the basis of competence. When some states say they are disadvantaged, I've always asked the question, who got them disadvantaged? Was there a place that maybe people in Benue on the plateau said you shouldn't do well in your schools when you compromise your education system in your state and you expect that your children are going to be able to compete favorably? When we write WAEC, there's no WAEC for Zamfara State, no WAEC for Borno State, it's the same WAEC. Now the learners are also being taught by using the same curriculum. So why are some states feeling disadvantaged? I would say because they've compromised. And compromise will always be. People say pride goes before a fall. I would say compromise goes before a fall. For any nation to lose its standing in education, that country must be interested, must have compromise. The likes of Sa'amadu Bello, with grade 3 teacher certificate, he could speak like a graduate. Satifa Balewa, with that qualification that he had, he could speak as a graduate. The question is that then what happened in northern Nigeria? When we were supposed to have been stepping up, we decided to compromise things. And this compromise today is showing in the substandard nature of the kind of education that we churn out, we give out, whether in the university, whether in the polytechnics, whether in colleges of education, whether at the primary school level. And if we continue like this, God forbid, we will one day lick the wounds that we have inflicted on ourselves. May that never be. But this is actually the reality on ground. So yes, we've not been treated fairly, but then what are we doing amongst ourselves? Why is it that in Benue State today, only the chief person can win elections? That is not fair. And we must call it the way it is. Let the person from whatever, whether he's Egede, whether he's Idoma, whatever Itolo, whatever ethnic group, once the person has competence to become the governor, he should be voted to become the governor. If we don't do this, then you see all these years that the Tarkas have put in this fight. Then the Patrick Dokatoris have put it in the fights. Then the David Lot have put it in the fight. it becomes a regret.
The Middle Belt movement continued with the UMBC entering into an alliance with Aminu Kano's Northern Element Progressive Union (NEPU) in the 1964 federal elections. As at today, the Middle Belt struggle continues, given the fact that the Middle Belt Forum (MBF), the successor organization to the UMBC, is still alive, active, and fighting for the interests of the Middle Belt ethnic nationalities. One challenge still plaguing the Middle Belt include poor representation. The Middle Belt has far fewer seats in the National Assembly in comparison to the far north due to the higher number of states, local government areas, and federal constituencies allocated to the far north by military fiats. The Middle Belt movement is very strong numerically, but has not been able to unite enough to wrest political power to better its people. Also, there is an ongoing ethnic cleansing and genocide in the Middle Belt by Fulani militia, named the fourth deadliest terrorist group in the world by the Global Terrorism Index in 2014. But the Nigerian state and mainstream media denies this reality by falsely describing the situation as a farmer-herder clash.
Yeah, so when whatever there was to become political parties began in Nigeria, it began from a regional point of view. For some it started as on ethnic basis. So for the Northern People's Congress, Jam'iyyar Mutanen Arewa, it was the conglomeration of all the people groups that were viewed by the colonial government. And that's why we keep making reference to Kogi, we make reference to Kwara of today. Now, so after the river, this way, and before the river, incidentally, the other way, so the river was not actually the marker, the river Niger, because some of the other people are still on the other side, and yet they are considered as northerners. So it was political north. Now, the political north with the Middle Belt, or what was to become the Middle Belt, I mean, the live wire of political north was the Middle Belt. Where did the North even start? The first secretariat of the North was in Geru, in Niger State. It was an ethnic group village. It's not Hausa. The Zingeru people are no Hausa at all. And then the headquarters moved from Zingeru because the place was very hot. And so the colonial officers who worked there had, when they fall into sickness or they fall ill sometimes, it becomes fatal. So they now found Kaduna to have maybe one of the things with Kaduna that it has a high dense rainfall average, or maybe is it velocity or high? There's a high rainfall. Now Kaduna became the next center of northern Nigeria. Where is Kaduna? Kaduna is a Gbagi town. The Hausa people lived in Zazzau, and that was where it ended in Jaji. So when you even talk about the role of the North, you're talking about the role of the Middle Belt. So it was in Gbagi town that the Middle Belt, or that the Northern Region Secretariat was built. Now, by the time the NPC began, the power was in Kaduna. I mean, where did Sadona even live his life? The longest he lived in Kaduna. Not Sokoto, not Zamfara. Right, so there has been a mutual relationship. It is the point where our mutual consent was not being reciprocated. that we say, we will be claiming that we're together, but we were not. That's where we started to seek for our own distinct identity, in order to prove that we have a say, we have an idea of the world. We are not a tabula rasa. So the people, the Middle Belt, when it comes to alliances politically, the political movement started to safeguard a Christian identity, and later it encompassed to safeguard an ethnic identity. So the Middle Belt Zone, the Middle Zone League, as at that time, supported the Borno youth movement. And the man is Imam. His name is Imam, Ibrahim Imam. We supported Ibrahim Imam, or the Middle Belt group supported Ibrahim Imam to remain as the minority leader in the Northern House of Assembly seated in Kaduna. Ibrahim Imam is surely a Muslim. So it's not about, faith is a secondary thing as far as we're concerned. We're first human beings. And so we start to treat people from that. As I mentioned earlier, the Gamai people, who were very active in the struggle for a separate Middle Belt region, were doing that not because some of them were not Muslim, but they were doing that in the assurance that so long as the identity of the Middle Belt was on the basis of an ethnic group, this is where they belong. Because one of the challenges with the far north is that even when you are a Muslim, if you are not Hausa, you are not Fulani, they also would find a way of naming you to say Tube Bene. Even they, the Hausa, they didn't start Islam. Islam started where? In Saudi, by the Arabs. So everybody has repented. After all, people were not Muslims before Prophet Muhammad saw the vision and then received the unction from Allah and then establish Islam. So nobody can claim originality. But you see, these are weapons of division. When somebody wants to deny you of a right, they create something to put you aside. And so we know their tactics, their strategies of denying people their rights. So the NPC, when the Middle Zone League started and became very strong, demanding for rights, they didn't find it easy. There were parties like Northern Elements People's Union, led by the chief of Talakawa, Aminu Kano. So what are we talking about? In politics, you negotiate for your rights. Doesn't matter where you come from, the faith you profess. Why would Aminu Kano leave the MPC? He left because he felt the MPC was not protecting the rights of the poor that he stood for. And then later we had the PRP, People's Redemption Party, which Abakarimi had belonged to. Those were elements. They were all the Northern People's elements. So if there were elements coming all out of the MPC, why would there be no elements coming from? Why would the Middle Belt not also create its own element to demand for its own rights? So the Middle Zone League, when we now had the Middle Belt People's Party, they entered into an alliance with the Northern People's Congress. It is when some of the dreams were achieved, some were not achieved. Then the action group from the western part of Nigeria, which also felt the punks. After all, Northern People's Congress was controlling the central government. So it was about resistance. And the UMBC didn't have much money to fund its activities. The action group had money. And in order to defeat the government and at the center, you needed alliance. So we were in alliance with the action group. Not today. We were in alliance with NEPU. Even if these alliances were not fully, but there was synergy between these parties in order to defeat the central government, which was being accused of being manned by the feudalistic Fulani of northern Nigeria, represented by Sa'amodu Bello, who himself is the son or grandson of Uthman Dan Fodio. So this is a fact. So why would people now come and say we are entering into alliance with the West for the first time. If we even enter into alliance with the West, I mean, the last elections, most parts of the Middle Belt didn't vote for Tinubu, they voted for Obi. And they had their reasons. At least Obi was talking about government policies that they feel would actually solve their own problem. Now you vote for what is going to save you. So who will blame us from entering into alliance with this? Obi is from Igbo. It is our people who fought with the Igbos when the secessionist Biafran war lasted. Today we've realized we shouldn't have fought in the war. Because why would we fight in the war and then later I cannot go to Bayero University Kano, later I can't go to Usman Danfodio Kano? No, what's that? I should be able to move freely in the whole of Nigeria, not just in northern Nigeria. But for northern Nigeria, our inability to really belong, because people have created hedges in order to root us out, is one of the greatest undoing that the North has ever done to itself. And until the northern leaders recover, begin to do something practical that will be convince us to feel that we're together, they've lost it, and they've lost it forever. I can't blindly follow somebody from northern Nigeria now because we come from the same north, when I know that when the chips are down, he's going to throw me away. I can't invest in something that is going to harm him or her at the end of the day. So that is where the problem is. This suspicion that we had, that our people had at Wilink's commission, of systematic discrimination, 1957, 1958. If you look at, you count to this time, this is already over 60 years. It is still here. So who is deceiving who? We should look at the facts in the eyes, correct these facts, and begin to do the right thing. If we had not done anything for Nigeria, at least at the time that the North needed to produce a head of state in government. Yes, Yakubu Gowon would say he's from Zaria, we know, but we know his parents came from Jos, from Plateau rather, and went to live in Zaria. And he saved this country, served this country diligently, and did not even steal money. At least if he stole money, we would have heard about it up to now. At least from that 1975 to date, they would have talked about the money he looted. Nobody has talked about the loot of Yakubu Gowon. He served faithfully. He may have his shortcomings, but these are some of the evidences of the kind of service that our people can actually give. What have we got in return? So yes, Middle Belt struggle continues. We will fight it. And our children, if they do not realize what they want, if we do not realize what we want to realize, our children will come and continue with the fight.
Let me start by saying the popular statement amongst us, the agitators, the activists in the Middle Belt, we normally say the Middle Belt questions. The Middle Belt question has still not been answered, has still not been addressed. The question of the southern minorities has been addressed. The Ogoja, Calabar, Rivers people, they got a Midwestern region. Today they have a zone, the South-South zone. What has happened to the Middle Belt? We don't have a Middle Belt zone, a geopolitical zone. Now, we are therefore still not satisfied. Our grievances, our grudges are still there. And those who have decided to dominate us are still trying to dominate us. Unfortunately, the military gave them the biggest weapon. All these 36 states in Nigeria, the 774 local governments, were created by the military. They were not democratically created. There was no discussion with anybody. How the military arrived at it, only they know. We know they claim they use population, they use land mass. For goodness sake, how can you give somebody a state because of land mass, which is empty, arid, not farmable? So, we find ourselves today in the Middle Belt, split, scattered among 3 geopolitical zones in the north, the whole northern region. There is the northwest, north central, and northeastern geopolitical zones taking the place of the old northern region. The north central zone has about 8 of what some people call the core Middle Belt states. I don't agree there's anything like core Middle Belt states, except that the complete states are part of the Middle Belt. The others is not the whole state, but just part of the state. So the North Central Zone is not synonymous with the Middle Belt. The Middle Belt has to be looked at politically and geographically. There's a geographical Middle Belt and a political Middle Belt. The geographical Middle Belt, that geography was actually drawn by the Wilink Commission. And it has parts of today's Kebbi State, parts of Kaduna State, part of Bauchi, part of Yobe, part of Gombe, part of Borno State. But it has the whole of Adamawa, Taraba, Plateau, Nasarawa, Benue, Kogi, and Kwara. Now, because we see in the 3 geopolitical zones an attempt to decimate us, to break us up, divide and rule. Some of the Middle Belt people are in the northwest, some in north central, some in the northeast. Tell me, for goodness sake, what's Taraba doing in northeast? Taraba is more south than Benue and Plateau.
Yes.
It has a border with Cross River and with Cameroon. How can you tell me it's in northeastern geopolitical zone? The southern Kaduna people who have been pummeled, that was southern Zaria. We have similar cultures between southern Kaduna and Plateau people. What are they doing in northwest? I remember in 2012, the southern Kaduna people applied, forwarded an application for the creation of a Gurara state, and so that they can have their own state, the southern parts of Kaduna State. They are incompatible, very different from the other half of the state. But this is how the Middle Belt has been tampered with. And it was deliberately done by our opponents, by the people who don't want us to make progress. Today, in the National Assembly, the political offices in the land, top 6 political offices in the land, that's the president, vice president, senate president, deputy speaker, and deputy speaker. Those are the top 6 political positions in the country. The other 5 geopolitical zones have 1 each. Northwest has 2 of those positions. North Central has none. They took our own and still gave it to the Northwest. And the 2 people from the Northwest are all Fulanis. This is how we are still being marginalized and oppressed politically. And when it comes to citing of federal institutions, developmental efforts, universities and what, we have to struggle for it or even get it last. We had a military administrator in the person of late J.D. Gumwalk. He requested that a university be opened in Plateau. There was only one university in Kaduna, they refused. He wanted a television station, but he knew he would need foreign exchange allocated by the federal government. So what he did was he played tricks and got the equipment in by buying them just from shops in Europe. He broke away from the Northern States Marketing Board and created a Benue Plateau State Marketing Board. and he created a new television station, a newspaper here. He cited the new airport at Haipang and things like that. And our opponents don't want that kind of development. When there was a coup, he was roped into that coup and executed. We believe he was innocent. Gumwalk should not have been executed. They used the military law that if you were aware of a coup plot and you didn't report it, you are as guilty as the coup plotters. But he told them at the tribunal, even the people who were trying him, he asked them, which of you did not know about the coup plot? If you say I'm guilty, all they wanted was to eliminate him. And sadly, he was eliminated. He's one of our heroes. So we are still facing that problem, and a dimension came up in 2009 when Boko Haram surfaced in the northeast, basically made of Kanuri people and then infiltrators from outside the country. Plateau State was one of their targets for no reason. Explosions were taking place here in Plateau. The Jos main market, one of the most beautiful in West Africa, was bombed. And then there were explosions taking place in churches. The Cooking Headquarters Church was bombed, St. Finbar's Catholic Church in Rayfield was bombed, and other churches. Why Plateau? What did we do to them? Nothing. And then so-called bandits, who are actually terrorists, surfaced 2012 to 2014 from the northwestern flank of the country, made up of Fulanis and then those who are not even Nigerians. Sometimes they can't even speak any Nigerian language. They have been attacking Middle Belt tribes in Niger State, Southern Kaduna, Nasarawa, Plateau, Benue, continuously. And we wonder why the federal government has not decided to attack them frontally and fight them. Why is the federal government not doing enough? We believe the federal government is complicit in what is going on. The narrative of farmer-herder clash is nonsense. These are one-sided armed attacks, and we call them genocide because it's one tribe attacking other tribes. It's tribal cleansing, it's genocide, it's land grabbing, because we have seen them displacing people from their villages and occupying the village. Who does not know the location called Mahanga in Riom local government? They came in there in the last 20 years. The farmers have run away for safety, and they have settled there and are building their houses. In Bokos local government, the same thing is happening. We have lists of hundreds of villages that have been attacked and displaced. And the people have moved to go and live in safety with relations elsewhere or are in IDP camps. And that thing is going on as we speak today. I urge the federal government to prove that they are honest about the fight against the terrorists from the Northwest. Why have they not been officially labeled as terrorists? Once they're labeled as terrorists, the way that the government will treat them will be different. They have refused. They still call them bandits. These are not bandits. Bandits are a group of thieves that come together, band together and attack and steal and run away or whatever. These are pure terrorists armed to the teeth. The kidnapping going on, more Middle Belters have been kidnapped than anybody else in southern Kaduna, parts of Kaduna, outskirts of Abuja, the FCT, up to Benue State. We are taking the brunt, the biggest brunt. I urge the federal government to end this terrorism in the Middle Belt regions. They are allowing the terrorists to reduce our numbers, to displace us from our land so that the terrorists can take over the land. This, I believe strongly. And for us, the Middle Belters, we need to also agitate, come together, point it out to the powers that be, the government, what we are demanding for, and to display what is actually going on here. Our legislators need to form a Middle Belt caucus in the National Assembly. Why have our senators still not formed a Middle Belt Senate caucus? House of Reps, Middle Belt House of Representatives caucus. Because they are lawmakers, they should be defending us. I also expect the middle belt people to form a political party so that they can feel a presidential candidate. I want the middle belt to feel a presidential candidate in 2027, next round of elections. I want to see a middle belt president. Why? Because he will or she will definitely handle this matter better than the present leaders are doing. And our chiefs, traditional rulers, also need to come together. Our traditional rulers have not been speaking enough against the terrorism that is going on. First-class traditional rulers have been killed, like the one in Bokos. No investigation. It's an unfortunate situation we find ourselves in right now. There are other subtle things going on in employment, in federal parastatals. Middle belters are suffering discrimination. If we go to the central bank, there was a recent retrenchment exercise. A lot of middle belt staff were relieved of their jobs. No reason was given. When we go to other federal parastatals, and I could name them, we'll hardly find a middle belter. And when we say middle belter, it's a Christian, usually it's a Christian. So there's still religious discrimination going on. There are committees in the National Assembly. Go and find where middle belters are given chairmanship of committees. You find they will have to be Muslims, or they are not. There are certain committees that they'll never be given. What of the ministers of Nigeria? Ministerial appointments over and over were being given the sports ministry, Ministry for Women Affairs, Ministry for Police Affairs. We have never been given Ministry of Finance. We have never been given Ministry of Works, because these are strategic. Whoever is there would have an interest too to take some of those things, works, roads, and other infrastructure to the region. Our roads linking us here in the Middle Belt are all dead. Is it the one from Kano through Saminaka to Jos is as good as dead? Is it the one from Abuja through Jagindi to Gidanwaya Forest and then Jos is as good as dead? We now have to travel to Abuja via Forest, and we go to Nasarawa State, go to Akwanga, and then Kefi to get to Abuja. In terms of road development, in the last few years, the government has abandoned the Middle Belt. We thank God when David Mark was Senate President, probably he influenced it, but the Buhari government built a new road, a new bridge that from Abuja now, a journey that used to take about 8-9 hours, now is done in about 4 hours. From Kefi, you can get to Otupo in a very short time. We thank the government for that road. That opens up. There is a major bridge that the government has refused to build, Ibi, across the River Benue. Why has the second bridge across the Benue not been built? It's an area that grows a lot of food, and the bridge is not that long. You can see the other bank. It's about, half a kilometer. That's all. And there's no bridge linking Plateau State and Taraba State. It's a shame. For people to go to Jalingo in Taraba State today, they have to go to Bauchi, Gombe, Numan, Yola, and you start another long journey to go down to Taraba. It's a shame. Or we go and cross at, Benue, across the River Benue, and then start the journey from there to Taraba. And you know what roads do? They open up development. They open up markets. Local farmers are able to take goods to the market easier. Transportation costs are brought down and things like that. Lastly, I would want to urge the Middle Belt people, especially the elite, that they need to unite more than they are doing at the moment. because there are many middle belt groups being formed. Even this year alone, 2 new ones have been formed. It's advisable that we come together. Over the years, as I've been involved in this middle belt activism, I have seen a lack of unity among middle belters. Everybody wants to set up a new group, and they normally will invite others to join them, and the others don't join them. I can list 15 middle belt groups today as I'm sitting here, but I will not call anybody's name. But there is the foremost, the oldest middle belt platform, and that's the Middle Belt Forum. I urge the Middle Belt Forum to please take middle belters on board. Bring other middle belters on board. They are passionate, they are suffering, they would want to make a contribution, they are qualified, they are educated. There's nothing wrong in the Middle Belt Forum expanding its net. I've been asking whether, I've asked several times, has the Middle Belt Forum ever called a Middle Belt Congress for all middle belters to come together? What of a cultural festival? Have you ever heard of a Middle Belt cultural festival? I think this is something that the Middle Belt Forum can do, and there are 14 states that are either wholly or partially in the Middle Belt. And a cultural festival will be the biggest thing to happen in Nigeria. I'm sure the funding can be done. The Middle Belt Forum is not a registered body, so we should not accuse it of not having a constitution, not organizing elections and things like that. But people can be identified, and more activities can take place. But for all the other groups, I ask them to cooperate with each other. I have a Middle Belt group. In fact, I'm involved with about 3, and we're urging them to come together. In 2018, my group invited 13 Middle Belt groups, and in 2018, 10 of them agreed to form one umbrella, although we agreed they should still maintain their identities and their activities, but let there be a meeting point, and that was how we formed the Middle Belt Congress. It's made up of 10 different Middle Belt groups. And I also encourage our traditional rulers to have a platform. Our legislators in the National Assembly should form caucuses, a Middle Belt caucus in the Senate, a Middle Belt caucus in the House of Representatives. I will urge our politicians, especially the senior mature ones, to register a political party that is controlled by Middle Belters, just like ABGA in the Southeast.
I believe in shared humanity, and I recommend that to be our way forward. Now, when I moved into this apartment, my neighbor, when my son came from school, and I went with him to go and greet my neighbor, I said, Assalamu alaikum. And my son was like, are they Muslims? I said, yes. Now, that is to say that gave me the impression that my son has never, since he was born, and he's 11 years, he has not lived directly with a Muslim. This is the first time. And that's very good for him, because now he is friends with the son of my neighbor, Mohammed. Mohammed comes to this flat, and if his parents are not around and it is time for prayer, Mohammed says the prayer right in this room. The first day he came, he said, sir, can I say my prayer here because my parents are not around? I say, yes, say your prayer. Wherever you want to say your prayer in this room, you are free to say the prayer. Now, how would I not treat Muhammad exactly the way I would treat my son, even better? Now, so this is the humanity we're talking about, shared humanity. We have not done that well in Nigeria. We claim to be a good country, people love people, but we are not serious when it comes to our interrelationships with one another, and that is a big problem. I would recommend that we get serious. I said no nation has ever developed by wishful thinking. We have to be deliberate about this development. We have to be sincere. There are so many opportunities in this country that once we allow only people who are competent to do this work, we will get all sort of competent people from everywhere. It's not true that everybody in the North is not competent. It's not true that everybody in any area is not competent. There are people who are competent, but there are those who have gotten into the system through compromise. It shouldn't be. Now, this is where the problem has been. I will believe strongly that the Nigeria of my dream, that the one I will leave for my children, is that which my child can aspire to go to school anywhere in this country. For instance, in the North, why should my child not aspire to go to Bayero University, Kano? Why should my child not aspire to go to Usman Danfodio in Sokoto? Why should my child not aspire to go to, let's say, Tafawa Balewa University in Bauchi? Why? Now, we've created all sort of limitations to us ourselves, and that is not helping us. I do believe that no town today in Nigeria where you would go and find all the people coming from only one source. Some people would be in that town either as medical personnel from another town. They are bringing development there. Some would be there as teachers. They are coming to teach your children, not their own children. They are bringing development. There might even be a shopkeeper who is an Igbo, or a fruit seller, or someone who deals in vegetables and selling there who is Hausa, or maybe someone who is a butcher. Without that person, you won't find the meat. We need to get to this point of integration. All Nigerians must think Nigeria first, then we think humanity general. Until we get to this, I do not see us making any headway. And I do not want to leave this world and see that Nigeria is this lopsided, where an elections would hold and nobody believes in the results of the elections. We are talking about NYC people being taken out of the camp, about 101, whom were found to have forged their certificates and forged their deployment and were mobilized for NYC. From a university, one single university. Now, why would a young person forge a certificate? He has seen an elder forge a certificate and nothing happened to that person. So we have to get to a point where the kind of legacy that we want to leave is a legacy of we're together, is a legacy of equity, is a legacy of fairness. And I would say this, when the elections of 2015 were held in Kaduna State, El-Rufai was seeking to go to become the governor. He campaigned equity and fairness. Those were the mantra that he used. 2 years later, I wrote him an email. It is there in the email. I said, can you say that you've treated our people equitably? Because by then, these massacres have started in southern Kaduna. Village upon village, villages were being wiped out by Fulani militia. The governor came out and said, hey, southern Kaduna people were the ones who actually molested Fulani. They've even paid the Fulani. He did not have an idea that this banditry was going to expand from southern Kaduna to northern Kaduna. In northern Kaduna, there were communities that have been sacked. They sat quiet without critiquing what the governor was saying at that time, thinking, it is about those people. It won't come to us. When it came to them, they didn't have time to fight it. They became the victims. That's why the role of social justice is that we must resist injustices done against the next person. Because once you allow it, the person succeeds on the next person. You would definitely be the next person. If not, another person will be a victim. And once you join a vehicle or you're in the marketplace in Nigeria and somebody is being molested, once you raise your voice and say, we are not talking to you, and you pass, you think that that person is being fair. The person is just using a diversionary tactic to take your mind away from demanding that the right thing be done. I believe that the right things need to be done in Nigeria, and these are social justice, where There is equitable distributions of opportunities. I should get opportunities based on my level of competence. And not because I'm a Christian, not because I'm a Muslim, not because I come from northern Nigeria. Until we get to that point, maybe another struggle will come out of the Middle Belt struggle. May it not be so.
Erik Erikson says, in the social jungle of human existence, there is no feeling of being alive without a sense of identity. And every identity originates from its history. Millions of youths today have embraced the Middle Belt identity for themselves. They see themselves as a religious and cultural amalgamation of people that don't belong to the Hausa Kanuri Fulani stock of the far north. They see themselves as the bridge that links north and south. The biggest yearnings of an average Middle Belter is the creation of a Middle Belt region as a federal unit within Nigeria. The late Dr. Obadiah Mailafia perfectly captured this central desire of all Middle Beltans in his Vanguard article when he wrote, "The Middle Belt stands for a decentralized parliamentary system that devolves more powers to the people and allows them to participate in the governance process that shapes their lives and the future of their children."